We're here at the Balboa Island Museum with John and Mona Swain. It's April 28th. The first question is, what is your earliest memory of the island?
My earliest memory is home movies that I have of us on the South Bayfront playing, and it must have been about 1945 or something in that area, because I remember one of the home movies pans out across the bay, and there's this big Navy ship pulling into the harbor, and I'll never forget that. And so that's probably my earliest memory, but triggered by the home movies. And then I'm sure we were down here off and on otherwise. My grandfather was down here probably in the 30s. I know he had to have been, because my father sailed to Tahiti from San Diego, and the boat was here in 1930. So they must have been around here a lot more than I thought. And it took years for me to understand that trip, because, you know, he passed away early. He passed away in 65 or something like that. And my mother never dredged up all this stuff, and he never talked about it. I think it was a trip that he wanted to forget. It was pretty terrible. But a good friend of mine that I met on the docks said, you know, heard my name and says, "I know your grandfather." And I said, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, he kept me out of the draft." And this must have been who knows when.
Sure.
But and he says, how much do you know about your father's trip to Tahiti? And I said, how about 00? And he says, well, I've got some articles in magazines that I know where they're up in the archives in USC. And he dredged those up and brought them down to me. And this was in the 50s or 70s, 60s or 70s, because we were living down here then when all that happened. But so we do go back a ways. But my earliest memory in my head that I can talk about is actually when we moved here in 1951.
Great. And you had just mentioned your grandmother's paintings. Would you share your connection to the area as well?
Yeah, well, her connection because of the Smith family, Hal Will Smith, and her name was Helen Smith. They were artists, or they were pretending to be artists, and they're pretty good, really. But I probably have 5 or 6 paintings, watercolors of theirs together. I have to say that Helen Smith was a better artist than my grandmother. I can't deny that. But they came down and, you know, they spent time down here doing all this watercoloring. And that's how I got to know about that.
Smith's painting.
But yeah, and Helen Smith's had a painting that we have, 1931, and it was in the original Laguna Beach Art Festival.
That's fantastic. Would you share about how you moved here in 1951?
In 1951, we lived on an orange ranch in Rivera, and we had sold it and had to move. But my parents had bought a house, or actually a lot, in Friendly Hills, East Whittier, and they were going to build a house there. Well, what are we going to do? We have to get out of this ranch house. We had a big orange ranch. Have to get out of this ranch house and go somewhere. And I don't know why, they decided to come here. And so we moved down here, showed up here in 1951, June, just starting summer. And we were our plan was to spend 1 year here while that house was being developed, built. So we were here June and July. And about August, everybody decided we weren't going anywhere else. We were going to just stay here forever. So they sold that place. We started looking for a house to buy, and we did, and by Thanksgiving, we were moved in to a new house on Appalena, 322.
That's fantastic. So what would you say was the primary reason for them to want to move here? Was it just, do you recall what drew them here to begin with?
I think it was just a place that they could move easily. You know, it seemed a little odd to me when I really think back about it, because it's a long ways away. But it was a way for us to come down here, and they had spent a lot of time here. My mother used to come here also back in the 30s because she, the Red Line came from Santa Monica, the red cars, and landed right here at the pavilion. Well, they would ride that down here, and is my understanding. And so they were both very familiar with this town. And just decided, I don't know how they decided that, they never told us. But we decided we weren't leaving.
And then your story came together as you got married and moved here in the 60s, you were sharing?
Yeah, then, so I went through, finished up high school, and then all of us at high school, just for whatever reason, went on to Orange Coast. You know, we all just migrated up there. So it's kind of like I went 6 years of high school because it was all the same people. And so I went to Orange Coast for 2 years, and then I knew I wanted to finish college, and so I went to Whittier. My grandfather
Go ahead.
My grandfather was on the board of trustees there, and so he, you know, made it easy, encouraged me to come up there and go. So I did, and so we moved in up there, and I couldn't have been there more than 10 minutes, and I met her.
Not true, but
Oh, well.
I'll let you think that.
What's your version of the story?
You don't want to hear my version of the story.
It was a couple more months, I guess.
Yeah.
But I met her in December after starting
Yeah.
in September. And so we would come back down here because my parents still lived in the house there.
Okay.
And so we'd come down on weekends and stuff like that. And so then I finished school, and we bought a house up in Whittier. She and
Much
I-
to his dismay.
Well,
He
she
didn't
really
want to live
wanted-
anywhere but here.
Huh.
And so we bought a house up there, and I got a job with Lockheed Electronics, and it's part of the Lockheed Corporation, because my pull to them was they had owned a piece of land down here by the Orange County Airport, and they were gonna put their big, not really a factory, electronic factory of sorts. That's where it was gonna go, and I thought, wow, I can go back to the beach. I've got a job that'll get me back to the beach. Well, that all kind of fell apart with Lockheed, and they, for whatever reason, shelved that idea. And so a couple of years went by, and I got a job in Long Beach, well, actually in Belmont Shore. And Belmont Shore was close enough to here that we could also move to the island.
So we moved to the island in 1965. The day we moved here, our son started kindergarten, and our daughter was 3. I was good friends with a neighbor who was on the board at the Methodist Church. And I had majored in elementary education, and I thought, you know, it'd be fun to do something besides just take care of 2 kids. I was one of the first teachers at the Methodist preschool, which was great. Cheryl went to preschool, and if I taught and she wasn't in class, she'd come along anyway. When she was in kindergarten, she went to afternoon session, so she would come to preschool in the morning, and then she'd go to kindergarten in the afternoon. And consequently met a lot of the same children that just then went on to Corona del Mar Elementary that is no longer there.
Great. What was it like here in 65?
Quiet.
It was great, very quiet.
You had the best of both worlds.
Yeah. What got us here then was we moved down to Topaz, and we have a friend that lives on Abilena. They were friends of ours. They were really a friend of my parents. And she came over to, or actually invited us over to her house. And this is Ruth Green. And she said, "Thou art gonna buy our house." And I said, "Oh yeah, right, Ruth. That's never gonna happen." Well, she made it happen. And so we bought that house in 1966 and moved in there. And so, again, we never left.
Would you share why the island holds such a special place in your heart?
Our whole life seems
Whole
like
life
it's been
here.
here. It's so unique. Our children, both, well, our son never moved very far away. He moved to the peninsula and then he lived on a sailboat. But our daughter actually bought John's mother's house at 322 Abilena. And
She still owns it.
her children spent the first, well, the oldest, 13 years of his life there. She married an Australian and they all moved to Australia. So our hearts went with them. But she still owns the house. She's currently working for a company in El Segundo and commutes from Australia. And now she's moving back. So, you know, we're all just gravitating, and our son is now moving back across the street from us. So
Wow.
it's such a special place.
Would you share a little bit about the community, what it's meant to you?
Well, I've loved this town. It was very different when we first moved here in the 50s. They had more stores that catered to regular things. You know, they had 2 barber shops, 2 markets, 2 service stations, stuff like that, a hardware store, all the things that are in a normal little town. And all of that stuff was here. Several nice restaurants and all. And so that was kind of special to me, and because it was, you hardly had to leave, you know. And the only thing missing that I can remember was a bank, really.
But then a bank moved in
But a bank did finally move in.
where the candy store
Oh, I see.
was.
Okay.
And then they just moved across the streets,
Yeah,
across the bridge.
so we can still walk.
That's neat. Were your children involved with the BIYC by chance?
Of course.
Yes, they were.
In fact, that's one of my main memories, because Cheryl was just turning 4, and you had to be 4 to join, and David was 5½. So I sat on the seawall and watched, and the older kids taught and took care of the younger children. So, you know, in fact, our daughter learned to row so well that when she went to university at UCSD, she was on the crew team and was so used to being around older guys, so she was coxswain of the varsity men. They'd come down and have meets with Orange Coast College. John was on the crew at Orange Coast College in 1956 and 7.
Yeah, 57.
And they went to the Olympic trials in Syracuse, New York. So,
Got last, but we sure had fun.
but BIYC was really big in our life.
That's great. Would you have a certain story that brings back fond memories of your childhood or that inner child within you
I don't know.
based on
You
the
know,
island?
Probably, if I were to really guess on one, it would be SOS TV. I was allowed to go in there and play with televisions and electronics and stuff like that. Others that meant a lot to me were Dodd's Malt Shop, which probably nobody's heard of. And it was down in the 200 block, about in the middle of the block on this side of the street. And the thing about that I learned later, that Mr. Dodd probably is the one who built our house. So he was a builder, but his wife ran that little malt shop. And it was fun to go in there after school, after high school, and we'd come home with our girlfriends and go down there and have a malt or something like that. And they had jute boxes, and it was just a fun place to go. So that was a good place. We spent a lot of time at the Jolly Roger. Bob's Big Boy to us. Bob's Big Boy.
Well, not that.
To a certain extent, but that's long gone. I worked at, my first job ever was at the Cape Cod House, which is now Amelia's.
Neat, okay.
And
Every time we go in there, he reminds all the waitresses.
I know how this place works. It hasn't changed much other than they've upgraded the dishwashing. We did all the I was a dishwasher, and we did all the dishes by hand. Well, they would not allow that today. That's for sure. But I sure learned a lot about eating seafood because I was fed a lot of it all the time.
That's great. The menu hasn't changed too much as far as
Not
the
really.
entrees?
It's probably gotten a little, well, when it was Cape Cod House, it was really fishy, all fish. Now it's turned partly Italian.
I remember, though, a big change there. His dad would take us there every time we came down, and they'd serve big loaves of French bread with apple butter.
Oh, okay.
And everyone
So good.
loved the
Yeah.
apple butter. We mention often, "Where's your apple butter?" But
Never comes back.
Maybe a recipe will pop up.
But it's a local place that I also have ties with the family, because one of the guys, who's a little younger than I, but he and I worked on boats together. And so I knew him pretty well, and they still own it.
That's great. Would you have special holiday memories that relate to Balboa Island?
Yeah, it's yours.
all of the holidays, early. John has 3 sisters, so the 3 sisters with their husbands and their anywhere from 2 to 4 children. His father and mother's house was large, had a huge dining room, so we all sit around the table, and of course the children had the kids' table, and they felt the rite of passage when they got to sit at the adults' table.
Yeah.
And then of course holidays like 4th of July and fireworks.
4th of July was a little wilder than that, because you could do fireworks on the beach and all that.
But Easter, Bell Week, everyone who was around, I lived in Whittier, and so in high school I'd come down for Bell Week with a group of girls from high school. And John has special memories.
I do of that, yes. Trolling for girls on Bow Week, and then we could, get to know them a little bit during the week. And then this neighbor and I, who we both went to high school, then we'd go all over Southern California to see them, up in Hollywood, Arcadia, Pasadena, and stuff like that.
Quite the gathering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was, and in those days it was really easy to drive those places, oddly enough.
Sure.
No freeways or anything, but it just seemed like it was easier and quicker, but there was no traffic either.
We would come to visit his parents. We would leave Balboa Island, drive across Coast Highway. We would not see another light until we got to Main Street in Santa Ana. And in those days, it was before the Santa Ana Freeway.
Oh, yeah.
They were just starting to extend the freeway out. But it was quicker to get to Whittier then, with
Than
no
it is now.
freeways, than it is now.
Yeah, it's certainly changed
Yes,
in many ways.
yes. Well, and John had the best of both worlds. He lived here when there were a lot of kids and girls and fun things going on.
Val Week and all
But
that.
then when
Right.
we moved here,
Right.
They got rid of it, so.
and
It changed.
so it was
Yeah.
quiet, so it was more family oriented.
Certainly.
So that worked well for us.
Perfect setup
Yeah.
for starting a new home.
That's right.
It's neat that you've seen both phases of
Yes.
it too. Somehow one or the other memory. Would you share how it's become a home to you, the island?
Well, raising our kids here and then our grandchildren. Our children were really involved in all the water sports and sailing. We've always had a boat, sabots, snowbirds, Lidos, and then,
Outboards.
yeah. Then our children partook of all those activities, then our grandchildren did the same. And they were quite the competitive sailors when they were here. And we went from Flight of the Snowbirds to Flight of the Lasers
Right.
with all of our children. And you did it as a child.
Yes. I've sailed in the Flight of the Snowbirds several times. Never did well, but there was about 150 boats in the race.
Great. Did you train your children and grandchildren that way since you were able to be part of all of
Yes,
those?
you know how I trained my son?
How was this?
Well, he didn't like to swim. He didn't like to get his face wet.
Oh, okay.
David?
David.
Yeah. We had a Sabbath, and so I said, okay, now here's what you do, and I kind of tried to tell him. And then I just pushed him out in the middle of the bay and said, you're gonna have to figure it out to get back, and he did.
Well, and we wouldn't let him go in the Sabbath until he could swim halfway across the bay and back.
So that if he
And the
fell
minute-
out, he could swim ashore.
We gave him that challenge, he learned to swim instantly. And he's a great swimmer now, but at age 4, he wasn't too
Not
sure he
so
wanted
good.
to do that. And then our grandchildren the same.
Yes.
But their dad was a good sailor, so he helped them a lot. But all 3 of the children, they belong to Newport Harbor Yacht Club, yes, and they, all 3 have trophies from sailing in the Newport Harbor Yacht Club sailing program. And now they live on a farm, hundreds of miles from the ocean.
Quite a change.
Yes.
Would you share a favorite story about any celebrities you might have met at the island?
Well, yeah, I guess I could. You may or may not know him, because this is the only one that I knew there were others around, but I didn't know him personally. You know, we used to see John Wayne and Joey Bishop, and everybody has told you that, I'm sure. But you probably don't know who Smiling Ed McConnell is.
Do you know Peggy?
There's, in the hallway here, there's pictures of the ones that were here.
Well, Smiling Ed, he wasn't necessarily right here on the island. He was right across on the Bayside Drive, and he had a boat over there.
Well, I'll tell him who he is. There was a Saturday morning radio show, and I used to listen, but, you know, I was probably 5 years old, and it was the Buster Brown show, and he'd say, I'm Buster Brown, I live in his shoe, this is my dog Tide, and he lives there too.
Oh.
So anybody our age that listens to the radio would know that.
So we got to know, I don't know how we got acquainted, a friend of mine in high school, this is before we were moved here the second time, and we would go over to his boat, and he was quite the alcoholic, unfortunately, but we could steal a drink from him from time to time on his little boat over there. And unfortunately, he finally got so drunk one night, we weren't there, but he fell over and drowned. But that was Smiling Ed McConnell, so we did know who he was.
And was it?
Smiling Ed McConnell is what they called him. And he would
Just Ed McConnell.
Yeah.
Would you share also, just by seeing John Wayne and joining the bishop in the area, did you ever encounter them as well, just by?
I was walking down Marine Avenue one day and John Wayne walked up behind me and was talking, and you knew he was there. He was such a presence, and
Well, he's so tall.
and his voice was so profound. You turn around and here's this bigger than life person, and
Yes, I just bought a book from this guy who was his captain of his boat for 16 years.
oh, that would be
It is
interesting.
a wonderful book, and it has nothing bad about him at all. He was such a...
I think he was a real gentleman. And then Joey Bishop was so funny. He'd be walking in and out of
Yeah.
stores, and there was always an entourage, and he had everyone laughing.
It's so interesting.
Well,
Well, John-
what about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Talk about John Wayne. While we didn't necessarily encounter him other than on the street, he did, he and his kids, I mean, he lived over in Bay Shores, and then his kids went to the local schools. He didn't put them into private school or anything like that. And so people knew him because he would go to PTA meetings and stuff like that. He was very normal in that respect.
Yeah.
From a,
Well, tell about when you were a teenager and Dorothy Lamore would rent on the South Bay front
oh yeah, she
in the
was,
summer.
and a good friend of mine lived down there on the South Bay front, and we'd go over there. This was in the summer, and she'd go out on the dock and sing, and it was quite the sing to us, and we just sort of ooh.
Well, another celebrity, not as well known, but people from around here, Skiles and Henderson, were,
They were schoolmates.
yes, but they were comedy and musical celebrities. They may still perform
Apparently they
in,
still perform back in Nashville or
No.
someplace. No,
where
what's
is it, in
the
Missouri.
big town? Branson,
Branson.
Missouri.
And Pete was an excellent musician, played the piano marvelously. And John's mother had a grand piano in the living room. And so Pete had come over and practiced
Bang away with the piano.
on her piano. Then where the Newport Yacht Club is, Newport Beach Yacht Club, was a marina and
Well, there was a restaurant there.
a bar,
Oh,
and
Restaurant.
Right.
the two of them would perform over there, and a lot of the locals would go away.
Well, and the girl that, it was in our class, her parents owned the place, so we got to know these places, you know, everybody was pretty close. Niles, Ken Niles.
It's so neat how the celebrity culture invaded your home life in a way that, you know, where you're shopping and eating. It's just, it's so fascinating, like looking at this, the history of that. It's
They
so
just
casual.
mingled,
They just sort of
Right,
mingled in with
right.
the crowd.
yeah, which was good. All of the ones that I knew acted normal. They didn't have a big entourage of, you know, bodyguards,
They were
and,
just
Right.
like
Right.
some of the celebrities today.
But it's neat how the community is even able to sustain that
Yeah.
normal
Yeah.
lifestyle too. So that's all of the effort, communal
That's
effort to do that. So it's wonderful.
And the sports figures, you know.
Oh, yeah, there was a few.
And the manager of the Angels, Scotia,
Okay.
Yeah, he still lives
UCLA,
Yeah, he's still,
uh-huh,
and the other
and the
guy.
Donahues.
Yeah.
there. The
live
Donahues,
on-
we were good friends with the
uh-huh.
Donahues.
Right.
They used to rent our house.
How neat.
We'd go away for the summer and go camping, and so they'd come in and rent our house for
Our
us.
girls, their girls grew up in
In
the,
our house.
yeah.
Wonderful.
I sure
Would you share some of the life-changing events that might have occurred at the island?
Gee, our whole life.
I don't know, that's a toughie. Life-changing events.
They could be personal or communal, whichever you might think of.
Well, we were talking about this morning, about that cleanup.
Oh, I think an event that was really heartwarming and helped our children learn that all people have something positive to contribute. Battle Island Improvement Association used to sponsor alley cleanup once a year. And the young kids would sign up and a father would have each block.
These are kids from the high school.
Okay.
No, from elementary school.
Or the elementary.
Corona Del Mar Elementary. John sponsored our block cleanup, and there was a young boy.
All 3 blocks,
Yeah.
through the alley.
A young boy in our son's class was a thalidomide baby, and he was a dwarf. He had one leg that was significantly shorter than the other. He had, one of his arms was only to his elbow. When he started school, this was his first year, they were 4th grade, his first year of regular class. He'd been in a special ed before that. And he was very belligerent. He did not get along well with the children. The teacher was very sympathetic, and she took all the kids aside and talked to them and encouraged them to treat him normally. Didn't take long for him to start interacting as a normal child would. So when the cleanup came about, we asked if Paul would like to participate, and his parents were very happy that we would have him be with us. They had their brooms and their dustpans and their
We had
trash
about
bags.
10 kids,
Yeah.
and we'd walk through the alleys and sweep them
He
all from.
went along, he worked diligently beside the others, and they took him as one of the group. Then at the end of the day, each child got $1 for working. His father was in tears, and he took the $1 and framed it for this boy. But I think the normal kids got a lot more out of it than anybody else, because they could share and
It's a
participate.
neat collective event.
Mhm.
The whole community seems very involved just in
Yes.
daily activities, so it's a neat specific example that you shared. Would you have a favorite story about a business on Marine Avenue, even if it doesn't exist today?
What about Jim Jennings and
Jim
service station? Or I didn't do it, but did you go down there and work on cars or anything?
No. No. I don't know, I suppose it would have to be the Cape Cod House, quite honestly, where I got my very first job and worked there as a dishwasher. And I've always loved that restaurant ever since, even though it's Amelia's now. But the inside of it has hardly changed. They've really left it alone. They were very smart.
We
And
celebrated your sister's 80th birthday
Birthday.
there last night.
That's right. So that's probably one of them. The only other place that I could think of maybe is the hardware store, because we go in there a lot and get bait and stuff like that. The hardware store, it was where,
Maxwell's?
No,
No, the other side.
the big colorful place.
Yeah.
Oh, Art for the Soul.
Art for the Soul.
What about the ferry? We have some fun memories of the ferry.
Oh.
They had around the island ferry, and John's sister and brother-in-law were best friends with Seymour Beak. And they would have parties on the Round the Island ferry.
Or on the big ferry.
I remember one on the Round the Island ferry, and it's just a big flat platform, kind of barge. And they'd have maybe 20 people, and
They had a wedding on it one time,
did they? Yeah.
on ferry.
So that was a business I remember that was fun.
Yes.
That's great. Do you have any other memories you'd like to contribute?
Not that I can think of.
They've pretty much covered all of them.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This concludes our interview here. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.